name is Samuel Hume, and I'm the host of Pax Britannica. More importantly, I'm here to moderate this session of intelligent speech and field questions at the end. The session is being recorded, so if you're watching now and live, welcome. If you're watching later on, also welcome, I suppose. I don't work for Zoom, but if you have any problems connecting or listening or what have you, get in touch and I'll do what I can to help. If you have a question for our speaker, you can either put it in the chat or you can click raise your hand, and at the end you'll get a chance to speak and use your microphone. There are lots of great sessions today and our time is limited, so I'll be keeping an eye on time and we'll jump in to give warnings when our session is almost up. So with that, let me introduce this session's speaker. We are joined by Greta Hardin of the History of American Food podcast. All set, Greta?
I am all set.
Well, then without further ado, I will step off stage and leave you to it.
Okay, sounds great. So today I have a very different topic. It is dealing with, here we go, butter substitutes. Now, in my title, I have 3 W's: work, waste, and war. But there's actually a 4th secret W, and that is whales. So every society has its favorite fats. And America is an animal fat country because the colonists who sort of made America came from animal fat countries. And the animal fats that they tended to like to use included cows and goats and sheep, ducks and geese, chickens and turkeys, and of course pigs. Okay, not that pig. That's too much pig. More like piggies. We'll stay away from the terrifying big giant pigs. And of all of these animal fats that were used by the sort of the mainly Northern European colonists, especially British and Prussian or German as we think of them now, their favorite animal fat was, of course, butter. Now, all societies settle on a favorite fat or a variety of fats because fats are absolutely essential. They're energy dense, and as long as you live in a direct effort society, that is the kind of place where you are personally chopping wood and hauling water and tending your animals and all that good stuff, you got to keep people at work. And fat's a great way to do that. But even after that, even after your society becomes more mechanical and you have indirect effort through a bunch of energy labor-saving devices, we still need fat. I mean, without it, our organs would get all hurt and banged up. Our bodies would sort of become this giant short circuit because we need fat to insulate our nerves and make them work right. Our brains need it to work. Again, keep all of the nerves in there separate. And our cells need it just to be cells. You can't have cell membranes without fats. So even when humans don't need to work outdoors for, say, 12 hours a day, we still need fats to live. And so even then, societies decide on or stick with their favorite type of fat. Now, as much as all of these our society, American society, loves butter, it is a lot of work. First of all, you have to milk the cows. This is a picture of a woman who actually owned a butter business in the early 20th century. She had a couple of employees. She had several cows, and she was doing extremely well, turning out 8 to 10 pounds of butter a week. And once you milk the cows, of course, you have to churn the butter. This is more of a bulk churn instead of those sort of hand ones that you always see in sort of antique stores. But even with like sort of a big barrel churn like this, it is a lot of work. And then, of course, there are other problems. Before mechanical refrigeration and stuff like electric lights, butter's expensive and it's seasonal and it can go rancid. So we have other fats that we like to use. There's lard, which comes from the slaughter of piggies, which, again, animal fats. And beef tallow, as you can see, it's becoming very fashionable now. You can find all sorts of varieties. And these were always around. They were used in the off season when there wasn't butter around. And as animal slaughter became a more centralized activity, these two were sort of the main manufactured fats in America that they would spread out. So sort of a butter substitute. Now, Americans by the 19th century and even the early 20th century had heard of olive oil. I mean, it was occasionally imported and they tried to grow it even way back in the 18th century. But when it was being shipped overseas, it often arrived rancid. The people trying to grow olives in America didn't understand how that worked, and they certainly didn't have the expertise to mill it very well. And as an animal fat country, olive oil just behaves differently. And one of the biggest gripes is you can't make a pie crust, or at least you can't make a pie crust the same way with olive oil. So it was sort of like this weird oil in the background. But at the same time, we were looking at, we need more fats for our people to be productive workers, to make pies. We were also a country that was doing a lot of manufacturing of cotton, and manufacturing, whether it is the butchering of animals or what have you, it creates a lot of waste. And one of the things that we were manufacturing a bunch of was cotton. And starting at the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, different cotton engines, or the cotton gin, had been introduced for the type of cotton that you could grow in America. The differences aren't that important. What is important is it went from the amount of cotton a single person could separate from the seeds in a given day from around a pound to up to 30 and sometimes even 50 pounds of cotton using these mechanical devices. And when you separate cotton, you get the cotton lint, the floofy stuff, and then you get seeds. And for every 1 pound of cotton, you get 2 pounds of seeds. That is a lot of cotton seeds. Well, cotton seeds, like a lot of seeds, are rich in fats because that's where the baby plants grow from, and they also need fats to do that. And so they can make very good fodder for animals, and in this case, cows, to make butter. And because cows have all of those extra stomachs, they can actually digest the cotton seeds. But once your cotton seed production goes up almost 50 times, that's too many cotton seeds just to feed 2 cows. And besides, making cow food, not very profitable. Making people food, much more profitable. And so one of the first artificial shortenings to be manufactured, butter substitutes in the US, was this stuff called cotyledon, which was cottonseed oil mixed with beef tallow. Delicious. However, it took what was a liquid oil, the cottonseed oil, mixed it with beef tallow, and made it into a solid fat, or a solid shortening. Now, just a little aside here, sometimes you'll hear fats like butter or cotyledon or Crisco or margarine or whatever called shortening. And what that has to do is when you add it to a dough, a wheat flour dough, instead of making sort of long, stringy, stretchy things, it breaks, it comes apart. And so that's why when you're making a pie dough with a bunch of fat in it, it becomes crumbly, or the dough becomes short. So cotyledon, this mixture of cottonseed oil and beef tallow, was our first sort of manufactured vegetable oil containing shortening. And the time that this was coming out, America was sort of developing this idea that pigs eating a lot of pork was for poor people. And if you were prosperous and you were looking to sort of move up the social and economic ladder, you ate beef. And so leaving that lard behind was great. And then also the way that this was manufactured, it was made shelf stable, so it wouldn't go bad. So we've solved everything. Okay, we haven't solved everything because America has a whaling problem, and kind of the world does too. A lot of things were going on. During the 18th and the 19th century, a lot of people were using whale oil for lighting. However, something was going on at the end of the 19th century. Kerosene was developed, coal oil. So when you sort of see city lamps, like in San Francisco or Chicago or London, those were lit by coal oil. Home lighting was kerosene. And then electricity was starting to enter everywhere. And people were excited about that because unless you were super duper wealthy and could get the very best spermaceti, or you could get beeswax candles, all of the other stuff that you burnt, it smelled bad. The whale oil smelled kind of fishy, or if you had tallow candles, you sort of had like this greasy, clingy, meaty smell in the air. It wasn't attractive. But kerosene didn't really smell like anything. Coal oil didn't really smell like anything. You had the ash problem still, but it was a lot easier on the nose. But if everybody's not going to be using whale oil for lighting, you have a problem. That you might end up with all these out of work whalers. What are you going to do with them? Fortunately, hydrogenation came along, the big hydrogen. And so you didn't need to mix liquid oils with solid fats to make something solid like codylene. So real quick, what hydrogenation is when you have a fat like an oil, some of them are very regular and they just go, squiggle, 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 squiggle in a very regular manner. However, other ones have these flat spots in them. And so when you try to put them together, they can't lie together nice and flat. And so that's why they continue to be a liquid at room temperature. But if you do hydrogenation, you straighten them all out. They can lie flat at room temperature, or they can lie flat. And so at room temperature, they can be solid. And so, ta-da, you can take a liquid oil like whale oil and make margarine. Now, when you add the hydrogenation, it changes a lot of the characteristics of the fat. And so it also doesn't smell fishy. And it turns out a lot of other things can be done chemically with these oils too. And one of them specifically is you can separate the glycerol, this little endy thingy that holds everybody together. That glycerol is converted to glycerin, which is then converted to nitroglycerin, which is dynamite and Alfred Nobel and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And then you have 1914, and all of a sudden everybody needs explosives because it's war. So you didn't really have to worry about what those whalers were going to do. They had a lot of stuff to contribute to war. So not only the stuff for cordite, which is a further development of nitroglycerin that goes into a lot of the shells, there was a lot of water to walk through during World War I in those trenches. And so you would use whale oil to keep your artillery and your guns in good working order. And the men walking through all of that terrible water in the trenches would put whale oil on their feet to prevent trench foot. Now, all of these war uses for whale oil meant no more whale oil margarine. So we had to come up with something else. Fortunately, we still have all of those cotton seeds. So cottonseed oil cake You run it through, you get the cottonseed oil out, you hydrogenate it, and it crystallizes. And so you get crystallized cottonseed oil, or as we know it today, Crisco. And because it's a solid fat, you can make the pies you always wanted to make. And as you can see, it fries nicely. It's digestible. And as wartime economies are going on, we start to really advertise the idea that animal fats aren't the way we want to go. Vegetable fats are even cleaner. We've gone away from the pig, and now we're going to go away from the cow, and we should have all of our fats coming from vegetables or butter. Everybody still loves butter, but there's shortages and it's expensive, still expensive. In fact, so many people were so happy about this new vegetable shortening that didn't go rancid. It could be kept in the cupboard. It just was very cooperative. Everybody loved it. And so dairy farmers were worried. Now, one complaint that people had is that if you were going to spread these butter replacements on, say, your biscuits or toast or whatever, it looked funny. So people wanted to give it a color. Now, the dairy farmers, of course, wanted to give it a less appetizing color and wanted this new stuff, this oleomargarine, this oleo, to be colored unappetizing colors like pink or blue. Whereas the margarine manufacturers wanted it to be colored appetizing colors. So they came to a compromise. You could color it yellow, but not at the factory. You could sell consumers the white oleo or the white margarine with a dye pack that at home the consumer could mix themselves. It's just absolutely the peak of compromise. And so we entered in to a wonderland of margarines. Now, this is the modern version, but in sort of the post-World War II era, and especially coming into the 1970s, the 1960s and 1970s, where sort of round 1.5 of plant-based diets and sort of saving the world and eat fewer animals came in, there was a wonderland of margarines. And at that time, the made from plant oils, made from vegetable oil was very much the selling point. It was cheaper. Again, it wouldn't go rancid on you. It was very predictable. And then we discovered cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually a chemical that is associated with fats, but it is only made in animals' bodies. So if you have your butter substitute made from a vegetable oil, then there's no cholesterol. And that became a very big selling point. So we continue on through the ages. Margarine falls out of favor, butter becomes cheaper. The manufacturing systems for butter sort of improve. The world kind of calms down. But then we get to the 2000s, and sort of where we are now, where the idea of a plant-based diet is on the rise again. So now we have vegan butter, we have plant milk butter, we have plant butter. You'll notice that most of these modern packagings don't say margarine anywhere on it. They have come up with new advertising and new ways of explaining that they are a plant-based or a vegetable butter substitute. So it's kind of funny. Despite our willingness to explore this sort of wonderland of non-butter butters, we look out there and there are oils everywhere. I mean, Americans in the end are just a little weird about liquid oils, even though making a pie crust is not one of our major goals. And so we do have specific places for like olive oil and sesame oil and corn oil and canola oil, peanut oil. And there's many other oils out there, and I'm sure they're going to rotate through and be the next greatest thing. Avocado oil, grapeseed oil, coconut oil, palm oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. It could go on. But for whatever it's worth, we continue in America to be an animal fat oriented country. And so if you're feeling a little nostalgia for the old days, now available on Alibaba and elsewhere, you can get a nice whale butter dish. And so that's where we are. We are a animal fat based society who will use oils when we want to, but we really just prefer our butter and make all sorts of butter substitutes.
That was fascinating. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. Just before, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the. My internet connection is unstable apparently. Hopefully, I'm coming through. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want to vocalize them. But while I wait for that, in fact, no, we'll go straight into it. Oh no, Janine, go ahead. You put your hand up. If you want to say anything, I can allow you to talk. There we go, I think. Janine, if you want to, you can unmute and ask a question if you've got a question. Okay, no, she wants to go chat. Okay. Well, I'll remove permission to talk just for now. And then I saw there was a question from Laurie who asks, is oleo just another word for margarine or does it mean something else?
Okay, so this is one of those things where a scientist came up with a really cool term that they super duper loved, and then they met the public. So the original name was oleomargarine, and it's a combination of Latin and Greek because, again, why not? And it
Scientists.
19th century scientists,
oh,
no
yes.
less, yeah. And so the original name was oleomargarine, which meant basically the pearl of fats. Like they sort of took these two Latin and Greek roots and smushed it together, because when you do hydrogenate these oils, it becomes this sort of like shiny pearlescent fat, and then it doesn't go bad on your shelf, which again, when refrigeration was sketchy or semi non-existent, like that was gold, baby, gold. And then yes, they brought it out into the world and they sort of split it into oleo, which will be a crossword clue forever and always, or margarine or margarine, depending on what your resources are, where you're coming from. But yes, the whole name was oleomargarine, and then it got split into those two. And I have no idea to this day why sort of the favored term was margarine, other than maybe it's just easier to say, or people who kind of know stuff. Oleo does sort of say fat.
Okay, so it has an association.
Yeah.
Janine has put a question there, but just as a follow-up to the other question, I'm curious now. You mentioned the scientist came up with it. Were they? Did they patent it? Did they have any involvement in the making of it, marketing of it? Did they just invent it and go, here you go, make?
This was fairly early in the 19th century, and so I don't think they were thinking that. The oleo part was sort of known well in scientific communities, that because there's like oleic acid, which is one of those long chains that was in the fat there. No, I think it was just sort of one of those terms that they came up with, and they just started using it. And it was just used generally, because again, this was sort of before the idea of like intellectual property was like really nailed down.
They just invented stuff and like, oh, this is cool, and told everyone about it.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's interesting. Janine's question. Sorry for delaying you there, Janine. India came with clarified butter, ghee. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
To avoid from fat. Wasn't this used in the US? Why wasn't this they're used in the US more.
Yeah, yeah. So clarified butter, yeah, that was
I've got a
definitely,
delay. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah. So clarified butter, absolutely. Ghee. So in the US, I don't think there was quite that understanding, again, because they were coming from, you know, a moderate to cold weather climate. And so you could just sort of stick butter in, hang it down the well or sort of stick it in a cave or whatever. And so it would stay good for quite a while. And so that sort of refinement was also just sort of not something that was typical of English and American cooking. It was actually the French who figured that out in Europe to do the clarified butter, because they would have sort of the warmer areas and sort of figure that out. But in that case, clarified butter was used as fancy, because what that does is it takes the water and the protein out of butter, because there's still like a little bit of protein. And butter is really fascinating when you just start with cream, like, as like the little kid thing, or you like shake up the thing of cream to make butter. Cream is water with fat globules sitting in it. And then butter is fat with water globules surrounded by it. So you've sort of flipped that over. And so when you do clarified butter, you take out the water, you take out the protein, and the water and the protein is sort of what allows butter to go rancid, what allows butter to rot. And if you take those two things out, you clarify, you make ghee, then there's nothing there for it to rot. So I think it basically comes down to we mostly didn't need something like that, and then we were too busy to figure something like that out.
Fantastic answer. I had no idea about most of that. I'm still getting the warning about my internet. I don't know what the problem is. I'm hoping it's not too egregious a delay. Um, just one of the last things you said in your talk was about how America is an animal fat nation in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. Um, I know that in America there's a lot of talk about the farming subsidy and the farming bill and the way that farmers across and agriculture is sustained. Is that Do you think that is part of the reason why that animal fat dominance is still there?
I would say it certainly helps. One thing I didn't really go into, but I might as well now. Part of why butter suddenly became like super expensive in the 1970s. I mean, there was inflation kind of like we have going on now, but the way farming subsidies worked in the US changed severely at the end of the 60s going into the 70s. And so America had what we call sort of the farm crisis. And so it was sort of this combination of the change in the way subsidies and taxation and land inheritance, a whole bunch of things changed. And then because you had mechanization and sort of just having the equipment to be a farmer became a lot more expensive. I mean, it's one thing if you have your horse and your plow, or even if you just have kind of your diesel tractor. But now if you look at farming equipment now, it's sort of like these $1.5 million 9-row giant cultivator thingies. And because
Mm.
of all of this combination of this stuff going on, farms were consolidating, and people who didn't want to get big, who just sort of wanted to be a family farm, were facing a bunch of financial crises. And so farms were consolidating, farms were collapsing. If you look at ag history, Willie Nelson was very involved in something called farm aid, and was to sort of help all of these farmers out. And because we were losing all of these farms all over America, the amount of people producing butter in America had just collapsed. And we needed to come up with an alternate, because they're just like butter kind of was very scarce as well. And as to why we just sort of like stayed stuck on being a solid fat country, I just think it was tradition. I think it's like that's the way it's always done. And so if as a
Mm.
kid you went to the store and you got solid fats, you did that as an adult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, if there are any other questions, please do put them in the chat. It was something apart from I made a note here, digestible as a selling point. I think that's brilliant. Like obviously, is it not otherwise? It did seem a bit bizarre, but then again, like that period of time, they so many things.
Oh,
Like,
I mean, the whole
this might
thing.
have medicinal properties. We don't know. Try it.
There were a couple things going on, sort of like what I
Mm.
talked about in the late 19th century. We're getting the idea that pigs were for poor people and immigrants, so everybody should eat beef. That's how you know you're really American. And so that's why when you look at sort of American versions of, say, Italian cuisine or Irish cuisine or whatever, they like have all this beef in it, and you're like, when I went to Italy, I didn't eat a lot of beef meatballs. What was going on? So that was sort of very much the American ethos. And so over time, it was like if I'm making my pie crusts or frying my food, um, or whatever, uh, in animal fats, that makes me poor and kind of grubby and so I want to do it with butter, but if there's not enough butter available, now I'll do it with vegetable shortening because I'm not using ew animal fats.
I, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And so I was just going to say sort of like it's digestible. It was we have also gone through these different things in America where it's like rough, tough, sort of food with bran and bones in it and stuff like that is for the worker. And I am a delicate, soft, well-bred person. So I want my bread white and I want my meat off the bone and I want my shortening to come from plants.
I mean, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that digestible is a marketing thing. When I don't know if they're McVitie's Digestives are a very popular brand of biscuit over here, and it never really occurred to me that that is a weird thing to emboss on a biscuit with the pigs for poor people thing. Robert J. Maycock has had a comment that the English had a similar thing about beef, the roast beef of Old England. It's I think I know what you're saying, Robert. That yes, it's this idea that the Sunday roast traditionally it should be beef.
Ah,
Now
okay.
how many people stick to that, but like I think yeah, um, there's possibly a similarity there. Laurie has another question. Why and how was butter colored yellow? Is it white naturally?
Oh, okay. That's a really super duper fun. I'll get back to, or let me just talk about the digestive thing really quick and then I'll talk about yellow
Hmm.
butter. Um, so just stomach troubles when you have, questionable refrigeration and you're sort of keeping stuff in the back pantry and you might have like moldy bits of this and that. Because we're sort of getting into the winter season when Scrooge talks about when he sees Jacob Marley, oh, it might be a crumb of cheese or a bit of undigested beef or whatever. Like people were always having stomach troubles. So by saying
Hmm.
this won't give you stomach troubles, yeah, that was a huge marketing thing. Okay, so how does butter turn yellow? Cows eat grass and that has a lot of beta carotene in it. And so in the spring and summer, your butter would be particularly yellow because the grass is like super duper rich. But if you're keeping your cow fed later through the year on, say, hay, it'll have a lot of the nutrition that your cow needs, but beta carotene is very, um, it's sort of fragile. And so when it dries out, it goes away. And so without that beta carotene in their diet, you're going to get whiter and whiter butter. And so it was typical to do things like feed your cows dried marigolds because those have a lot of beta carotene in it. Sort of like people will feed those to their chickens to make the
Hmm.
egg yolks more yellow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so if you look at some modern butter, some of it will be quite white, but you can also see some of it is dyed a little bit.
Hmm. Oh, more comments from Robert. Butter is off-white and up a make about beef was that it's especially seen as especially good indicator of national prosperity and identity that we could eat beef. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that. Please call me Bob. Okay, Bob. Thank you, Bob. I'll keep that in mind for later in the day. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes left, and then we'll have to bring this to a close. You mentioned the pig for poor people. I know that isn't it one of those
I think
massive
Janine
marketing
might have one more
legends?
question in here.
Oh, sorry, did I miss that? Oh, yes, she did. No, sorry, Janine. Nutrition-wise, does the fat where it comes from, animal, plant matter, whatever it is, irregardless of cholesterol? Sorry, let me restart this. Nutrition-wise, does the fat where it comes from, animal/plant matter, irregardless of the cholesterol, I mean, the benefits of fat that you mentioned at the start?
Yeah. Okay. So does it matter where it comes from?
Yeah, that's the question.
Largely, no. I mean, there are some fats that our human bodies, because we just have one puny stomach, can't digest that well. Unlike, say, multi-stomach animals, they have a couple more goes at it, and so can get a lot more different fats. So basically, as long as it doesn't contain anything that's toxic, it's fine. If you have your body chemistry is set up that you manufacture a lot of cholesterol in your body, which is something some people do, you might not want to add a bunch more to it. But all in all, if your body is sort of working generally how it should, the source of the fat doesn't matter. Again, as long as it's not one of the toxic ones, it doesn't have like creepy biochemical time bombs hanging out in it.
All right. Well, unfortunately we have to bring this to a close because there's more sessions beginning in a couple of minutes. But thank you so much, Greta. That was really interesting. That was fantastic. And
those are great questions. I enjoyed answering all of that stuff.
There was some really fantastic questions. But yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day. Thank you very much, Greta. Again, that was great.
All right.
I'll
let you go. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. Enjoy the rest of the day.